Hi everyone. For the last couple of days, we have been talking about scientific method. We said the first step of scientific method start from observations. So there are two different kinds of observations. The first one we call it qualitative observations. Qualitative again is related to quality. We are going to use our five senses to observe. That's what we have learned. Okay, you may stop here and write this qualitative down on your notebook and see we are going to use our five senses to observe. But as a scientist, we cannot only use our five senses. As scientists, we normally use measurements. Okay, that kind of observation we call it quantitative observations. Quantitative is basically talking about quantity, talking about how many, the numbers or amount. They need to be measured by scientific instruments. If we are in school, we would do lots of labs to use those instruments. But right now, we're just going to go through it and to get familiar with some instruments and a international standards system. So you may again pause to write quantitative down. Sorry, can't even say this word. And they say it's about numbers or amount. It need to be measured by scientific instrument. So just for example, if you saw those candies, use your five senses, you're going to see there some red and some green ones, and you may taste it. You say it's sweet. Those are qualitative observations. Quantitative observations, you might count them. There are five pieces. You can also weigh them on the scale. You can say each one weighs 2 grams. That's basically quantitative observations. So to be able to take the measurements, we are going to learn about scientific measurements. You're going to write this down on your notebook. We are going to use a standard system in the world. It's called the metric system. Okay, we are not going to use the system in the US anymore, not the feet, inch, or pounds, ounces. Okay, we're going to use the standard system. It says meters here. Okay, we're going to go through the detail right now. Please write this down on your notebook. And for any measurements, there's two parts. One is called the number, and the other one is the unit. Only the number does not mean anything. If we see 23, we don't know what does that mean. 23 of what? If you take a measure of a desk, 23 of what? Or if you take a measure of the weight of some papers, like it must contain two parts, numbers and the unit. Okay, a number and a unit. We're going to go through the unit part. Okay, so for the unit, the system we are using in the United States, it's not standard unit. Only a few countries, this is basically US, only three countries basically are still using this system. And there's another system called International System of Units, or you heard people say SI system or metric system. Those three are talking about exactly the same thing. All the countries, other countries in the world, they use those standard units. That's why we care about it. We have to know those units. So as a scientist, you have to communicate with other people in the world. That's why we have to really learn about standard units. So we're going to go through the detail. Okay, excuse me. Units in the metric system. There are five very common ones. Eventually, we are going to learn more. Okay, so right now you just need to know those five. Please write those down on your notebook, and I'm going to go through each one in the detail. Okay, measurement, length, standard unit is meter, volume is cubic meter or milliliter, and for mass, it's gram or kilogram. For time, it's the same as what we use, seconds, temperature, Celsius. Okay, please write those down on your notebook. And then we're going to go through each one in detail. For length, what we do is we use meter stick to take the measurements. Okay, the unit for length is, um, sorry, we're not going to use those units anymore. Okay, it's basically meter or centimeter or kilometer. I'm going to explain that to you, but the standard unit is meter. For volume is talking about the space object takes up. You may write those down if it's new to you. Volume is taking the measurements of the amount of space object takes up. For anything like it takes space, right? Um, so how do we measure volume and volume? Okay, for volume, there are different measurements for solid and liquid. For liquid, normally we use a graduated cylinder, which look like this. Okay, we would use those in school. So the unit is milliliter or meter. Okay, it's a very, very precise equipment to take measurements. For solid, people normally use cubic meter, which how do we measure the volume of solid? We're going to really talk about the detail later on. Right now, you just need to know for a regular shaped object, we can just calculate it by taking the measurements of length, width, and height, and use this times that. You might learn it in math, but we're going to really go through those eventually. Okay. So for mass, how do we take measurement of mass? Mass is talking about the amount of matter in the object. Everything in the world contains material inside it, contains stuff like atoms, and you know, it has mass. Okay, how do we measure mass? We use balance. There are different kinds of balances in the world. Some ones are not that accurate, some ones are very accurate, like the one we use in the lab. What's the unit for mass? It's gram or kilograms in the standard unit system. Again, please write those down if you didn't write it yet. Okay, temperature. This we don't use Fahrenheit. We use Celsius. Okay, water freeze at 0 Celsius and boiling at 100 Celsius. That's how people define Celsius. It's more scientific. That's why we use Celsius instead of Fahrenheit. Okay, for time we just use seconds, which is exactly the same as what we are using here. Okay, that's pretty much for the unit we're going to learn, standard units. There are other units, we call those prefixes. Uh, I'm going to show you like there are kilo, there are people use a K to represent it. It means 1,000. So you heard people say kilometers, kilograms. So those means kilometers means 1,000 meter, kilograms means 1,000 grams. Okay, and they're mega. That's a big one. Okay, probably if you're familiar with computer, you know that it means a million. Okay, so there's also giga. We see gigabytes. That's billion. Okay. Um, you heard people say deci. Those are like um, 1/10. It's smaller. Okay. When you heard people say decimeter, that means 1/10 of a meter. And centi, which is people use a small c to represent it, is 100 times smaller. Okay. So if you heard about a meter is like the length of for a meter is like the length of a table. For 1 centimeter is like this short. Okay, it's about the length of your fingernail. Okay, so milli is even smaller. Milli, people normally use a small m to represent it. It's 1,000 times smaller. You we normally see milliliter, which is 1 time smaller than 1 liter. A millimeter is 1,000 times smaller than 1 meter. So normally, if you feel your fingernail, the thickness of your fingernail is 1 millimeter. Okay. So micro is even smaller. This size look like this. It's used in biology a lot. Okay, it's a millions times smaller, so lots of zeros. It's a lot smaller than a meter. Like micrometer is a tiny, tiny. We can't see it with our eyes. We need to use a microscope to take the measurements. Okay, that's everything about units. So please write those down on your notebook too. Okay, today, sorry for lots of notes. And then we're going to take practice in the class on Monday. Thank you so much for watching. I hope everyone will enjoy your weekend.